Oh, this is going to be a good one.
You're listening to Pete the Planner.
This week on the Pete the Planner Show, we answer your money questions, but better yet, no we don't. I asked the questions this week of presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend. He joins me now. Mayor Pete, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
It's good to be you. I've listened to you in my ear for the last couple days on your 9-hour audiobook, so I feel like you're somehow Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder. I have this long belief that presidential candidates and our government leaders sometimes don't have a finger on the pulse of what real Americans are going through financially, and so that's why I wanted to have you on today. And some things stuck out in your book. You have an $800 mortgage payment, which to me I think is classic American financial lifestyle. You are a person that has an understated mortgage payment that allows you some financial freedom. And I just wonder, of the people who've put their name in the hat so far, how do you feel your story resonates with people from just a personal finance perspective?
Well, I mean, one thing I can say is that, Chasten and I live a pretty middle-class lifestyle in a middle-class neighborhood in middle America. I certainly am conscious of the situation for people on the coast who have just spiraling housing costs in our part of the country. The costs have been a little more flat, but you still have to work hard to manage that and for things to be affordable in our community. One thing I think about a lot is that I was able to refinance my house a few years after purchasing it to take advantage of lower interest rates. But what we've not been able to do is do the same with the student debt. That's also a very big part of our finances because of Chasten's studies that he undertook in order to become qualified as an educator.
Yeah, I'm curious, and as you look at that and you look at your careers, how does that play in your ability to save for financial independence? You obviously have a unique career as a government official, and I'm curious, if you stayed on the path you are from a savings perspective now, could you achieve your retirement goals, or are you banking on bigger paydays to come to achieve that?
Well, it would be a bit of a stretch for us, candidly. So, we obviously, when you're in public office, you're not counting on that being a career. At least I think you shouldn't. But in order, for example, in my particular case, in order for my defined benefit retirement to kick in and vest, I would need to be in office for 10 years, which isn't in the cards. I've decided to be a 2-term mayor, and that's about it. I've gone through periods where I had no income at all because I was a full-time candidate. At that time, I was able to use reserve income as a naval officer to supplement that just a little bit, but created some unique challenges. We talk a lot about using debt and financial planning to do smoothing, to try to smooth your income over time. When you're not independently wealthy and you choose public service, your income's about as spiky as it gets sometimes. And, frankly, we're contemplating that for the future, too, if we're looking at a period where, once again, for some period of time, I'm a full-time candidate.
I'm currently obsessed with financial fragility, and I feel like for Americans of every income level, it's a real thing. And I wonder, during that period of time you're running for state treasurer, when you were, considering, am I going to finance my life on credit cards? Was that the most financial stress you've ever personally been in? And how do you think, and I'm not trying to get you to compare it, Pete, to what Americans' financial fragility. I'm just curious as to how you think of the two, the worst you've ever been, and then what it feels like to have $150,000 in medical bills.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to compare my situation to others because everyone's a little bit different, but I can certainly relate to the situation of seeing the debt grow faster than your cash, even when you're trying to live a very reasonable lifestyle, and asking yourself what you would do if your plans don't pan out. I had saved enough that was able to get me through the first part of my period as a full-time candidate, but eventually I had to rely on credit card debt as well. And then once I had happily won an election and had this job, I was able to chip away at that and bring that back down to where I could start saving again. But the real thing, and fragility is a good term, the real thing to worry about is if you get a curveball, if I had had an unexpected illness, if something had made it impossible for me to continue seeking or to take office, if some unexpected financial shock had come my way, so many Americans are living within just one or two mishaps of a financial hole opening up that they would not be able to dig themselves out of. And, we need to start making policies that are more sensitive to that and more commonsensical about creating the financial resilience that would allow ordinary Americans to weather those shocks more readily.
One of the more poignant sections of your new book, Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future, is when you talked about the hard waste collection jobs that the city of South Bend had to eliminate because of technological advances. Now, those folks were offered other positions within the city. My question, Pete, is in the next decade or so, how can Americans be prepared for these technological efficiencies, eliminating these old blue-collar jobs? And, what are people to do?
Well, the biggest thing we have to realize is that it's increasingly going to be true, especially for people in my generation, that we may find ourselves changing not only jobs but careers more often than our parents changed jobs or even employers. This is a trend that's only going to accelerate, and frankly, it's not confined to blue-collar positions either. There are a number of positions in medicine, increasingly perhaps even accounting and law, that are subject to automation. Now, the good news is, overall, macroeconomically, it looks like many of these technological trends will create as many jobs as they do away with. The question is, how can any one individual be ready to succeed in that environment? And we as a country, I think, need to do a much better job of equipping people with the skills that are going to work across different disciplines. If you're on a factory floor right now, as manufacturing becomes more and more advanced, the parts of your job that matter most and the parts of your job that are going to serve you well even in a different career are things like problem solving, critical thinking, interpersonal interaction, upward and lateral management. They're not necessarily individual technical skills. We've got to teach those too, but those are going to be changing at a faster and faster pace.
Now, you grew up in a college town in South Bend. Your parents were professors at Notre Dame. You went to Harvard. You're a Rhodes Scholar. But I wonder, in today's environment in America, is college oversold to too many high school students? Because, frankly, in the work that we do here at my office, Pete, we're picking up the pieces of broken dreams of education that are too expensive. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not for everybody. And, many of the most intelligent and capable people I work with in the city workforce are not necessarily college graduates. So I do think in our haste to make sure we were a country where everybody who wants to and ought to go to college has the opportunity, we may have taken our eye off the ball of making sure that we also show a lot of regard for education that's outside of the university system, technical education, and the kind of training associated with getting ready to go into the workforce more quickly. That being said, college isn't just about creating workers. It's also about helping us grow as citizens. And one thing we're focusing on in South Bend right now is lifelong learning that accounts for everything from on-the-job training to college to things that currently aren't officially considered education but probably ought to, like the skills you might learn from a relative around how to do a particular process in the home, or language skills, and find a way to credential all of those, something like a sort of life transcript, to capture all of the unique skills and capabilities that individuals get, because in this changing world, it's more and more difficult to predict in advance which of those skills will be the most relevant.
Now, your husband, Chasten, tells me that in terms of sharing a household budget, you're a pretty good partner, that occasionally you spend too much money on books, but you don't give him too much trouble on itemizing his Target trips. I wonder, in the 30 seconds we have left, what's it been like as a man combining your finances with another person? I mean, that's what Americans deal with every day in relationships.
I think for any couple, it's really challenging, and the most important thing is communication. What really causes, I think, stress in any marriage when it comes to finances is surprise. If you know something's coming, or you have a view about a plan or something you'd like to do, then you can communicate about it and prepare for it. It's when sometimes, maybe out of discomfort, one partner hesitates to share with another when bills are getting out of hand or when there's a big expense coming up. You're always better off, even if it's uncomfortable, bringing it up, sitting down and talking about it, than letting it bite you later and cause a surprise.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg, presidential candidate for the United States of America, and the person who's been in my ear on my trip home from Orlando this week, listening to his audiobook. Safe travels on your road, Mayor, and thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Sure thing. Pleasure to be with you.
Coming up after the break, an analysis of our talk with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. You're listening to the Pete the Planner Show. I'm Pete the Planner. Back on the Pete the Planner Show. Yeah, so that was the first time I've talked to a presidential candidate. And I know what you're thinking. Wow, impressive guy. I agree. I thought he did a great job. So it was Mayor Pete Buttigieg. I couldn't get it. I thought, on some level, I thought, I was like, okay, I'm going to get like 4 segments with him. But he was very generous with his time. He did Stephen Colbert last night. He did a lot of work in New York today. And he was very generous to spend time with us before he jumped on the plane. I welcome to the program now a gentleman who's been sitting in the studio with me, journalist, writer, Adam Wren. Adam, describe to my friends here. You've seen your work in Politico, Indianapolis Monthly, Importantville, the great Indiana-centric newsletter on politics. Where else can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Adam Wren, and those are pretty much all the home spots for me.
No, those are good. So, all right, Adam, thoughts? The point of having him was Mayor Buttigieg on was not to like, is he a good candidate for president? Don't care about that. I just want to know if the people who potentially could be the leader of the free world truly understand our financial lives. Do you think Mayor Pete delivered on that idea?
As a journalist, one of the things that fascinates me about Pete Buttigieg is that when you look at the 2020 Democratic field, he's one of the few who doesn't have a $200,000 or $150,000 salary as a member of Senate, or as a private business owner, or someone like Howard Schultz. He's someone who very much talks about living a middle class lifestyle. His mortgage, as he mentioned, is $800 a month. He lives in a fixer-upper that I visited when I reported on him in South Bend last fall. He's fascinating, and he can sort of, make an authentic pitch. When he was with voters in Ankeny, Iowa last Friday, he talked a lot about how student loans, his husband's student loans, have impacted him and have impacted their finances. And he's really running as sort of a millennial candidate. At 37, he would be the youngest person ever to hold the office. And he talks a lot about this issue that he calls generational justice. And, the student loan bubble, so to speak, is really impacting him and impacting others. And that's something that in his pitch to voters that he has cited frequently.
Now, this is a tough show to do for me because I don't like, my audience expects my opinion. This is an opinion-based show. And I think sometimes on the shows like this, they're expecting me to give my opinion as to whether I think he's a good candidate. That's not what I want to do. Instead, I've been reading his book via my ears, Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future. I just like learning about people. I like learning about their stories. I find him fascinating. I find him incredibly intelligent. He went to Harvard. He was a Rhodes Scholar. I mean, in his book, I don't know much about being a Rhodes Scholar, as you can imagine when you look at my LinkedIn profile. And Adam, him just describing what it's like to be a Rhodes Scholar and what's the point of the exercise, and then what he did with that education, going to McKinsey for a couple years to do management consulting. I just haven't seen anyone like this run for president in a while,
Yeah, he's a fascinating character to me, and I can say that as a journalist, my job is to find interesting trends in people and to follow them. And he is someone who has captured my attention. We'll see what happens with his presidential campaign. By all accounts, it's a long shot, but he's interesting to me outside of politics as sort of a social, cultural figure. He's a millennial who has found his voice. He's written, by all accounts, what is a compelling memoir. The New York Times and others have compared it to Obama's book, Dreams from My Father. And I think of Obama's personal story when I think about the interview that you just did with Pete, in that both of them, sort of carried student loan debt in their time in office. And that's sort of a unique phenomenon when you think about the history of student loans. So they are two characters who have had to deal with a challenge that a lot of people in America are dealing with right now, myself included. So I'm interested to hear, his thoughts on personal finance. And again, a lot of people that we're seeing jump into the race are sort of, coastal figures, people like Cory Booker, people like Kamala Harris. And so it's interesting to hear someone from Middle America talk about their finances and their budget and how they think through decisions, whether it's buying books from Amazon.com or having your spouse make excessive purchases at Target, which is something that I can relate to as well.
Me too.
So it's interesting. It's interesting to hear him sort of pull back that calculus. I also think we're at a moment in life right now with people like Beto O'Rourke, sort of making themselves more transparent, whether they're at the dentist office getting dental work done or whether they're blogging on Medium.com about their travels. I think, one of the things Pete Buttigieg is trying to do is to show a certain level of authenticity, which he sort of did, I think, on your interview, talking about, debt, talking about his mortgage and, living on credit for a time.
He fascinates me. He fascinates me because he feels real. My wife is a big fan of politics, and so she was listening to an interview the other day with someone. I don't know who it was. Just take someone, everybody. It was someone who was both on John Edwards' campaign and Barack Obama's campaign, and she said when it came to policy, in John Edwards' campaign, what they would bring in consultants and find what positions they should take based on the popularity of the opinion, and that's what John Edwards would take as their opinion, his opinion. And then in Barack Obama's campaign, it all came from Obama. It was these are Obama's thoughts. This is what we're doing. And in the same respect, that's exactly what President Trump is doing. President Trump is saying, I don't really care what is popular policy. This is what I want. It seems to me, in this line of thinking, Mayor Buttigieg, Mayor Pete, seems like it's going to be his policy, if this is his thing, is coming from him. He's not talking to consultants.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me when I profiled him for Indianapolis Monthly recently was that his campaign manager is his high school friend, Mike Schmuel. He was a junior at the private Catholic school they both attended when Pete was a senior and ran for senior class president. And so it's almost like a buddy comedy. It's almost like their relationship was written by Aaron Sorkin, sort of a Leo McGarry, President Bartlett sort of relationship. But he really does, I think one of his contributions to the presidential field, when all is said and done, whether or not he wins or depending on how deep he goes in the primary process, is going to be that he's sort of moved the conversation in the public debate about how people in Middle America relate to issues. He is made the point in several recent interviews, including on Morning Joe, that the center of American politics isn't necessarily the point between Democrats and Republicans, that the center of American politics is actually somewhat to the left of what a lot of people expect. But yet he has a way of talking about, fiscal issues, whether it's his personal budget or the nation's budget, in a way that sort of sounds Republican almost. I mean, as he talked to you, I was struck by sort of his personal fiscal conservatism and the way that he manages his budget, living on less than he makes. I think that's an interesting thing about him.
Yeah, we are based in central Indiana here. And so for my central Indiana listeners, to me, he reminds me of Mitch Daniels in his thoughtfulness, in it's just his personal nature. And I know a lot of people, that's a throwaway phrase if I've ever heard one. Mitch Daniels had supporters to hopefully run for president, and he didn't, and who knows what the future holds for him. And just so you know, if you listen to the show, we are going to try to do this with as many presidential candidates as we can, and we're going to analyze each one of them. So Adam Wren joins me for the rest of the show today. We just talked to Mayor Pete Buttigieg, coming back with more analysis on our interview. I'm Pete the Planner, and this is my show. Back on the Pete the Planner show here with Adam Wren. Journalist been covering the Pete Buttigieg campaign. Adam's sitting in studio with me. Just finished our interview with presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. I encourage you, if you missed that interview, I don't want to say you missed the good part because Adam's here and it seems rude, but go find it on my podcast, The Pete the Planner Show. You can find it on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, but that may not be true. I've messed up some of the settings, so just go to iTunes. Okay, so Adam, I feel like Mayor Pete, from just consuming his book via audio in the last several days, Shortest Way Home, One Mayor's Challenge and a Model for America's Future, which, by the way, is the #1 best-selling book on housing and urban development on Amazon.com.
It's a competitive category.
He has got this fixer-upper mentality that is pervasive throughout his life. He purchased a foreclosed home, which there was holes in the porch and there was termites and like all this other crap. He and his husband Chasten fixed it up. He bought an old grand piano from an elderly man, I believe, in Chicago and fixed it up. And he drove a crappy Ford Taurus like most of us have and just dealt with it. He's helped fix up South Bend. And they have 2 rescue dogs. What is it to say about someone's personality that sees value in all things and what those things could be?
You know, he talks about himself as a progressive, politically speaking. But in a lot of ways, in spending time with him and the way that he frames issues, he does so from a classically conservative approach. And when I say conservative, I mean conservation. He takes things that are handed to him and tries to conserve them and steward them in a way that makes them appreciate, whether culturally or financially. The way that he sort of focuses on South Bend government is fascinating to me. The way that he thinks of things in in fiscal terms. I mean, his training at McKinsey really still sticks with him. He talks about in his book, as you've read, sitting and working on a database in his computer in a conference room on Canadian grocery store prices. And he approaches government in that way. He approaches his own life in that way. He tries to find assets that are undervalued and invests in them and improves them over time.
Yeah, it is interesting. One of my favorite parts of the book is he's a management consultant for McKinsey. By the way, if you've ever seen the show House of Lies with Don Cheadle on Showtime, it's the greatest sort of weird, inappropriate sitcom you can see on management consultants. Anyway, no one cares. One of their projects was grocery prices at a Canadian grocery store. And it's fascinating to know that he knows more about Canadian grocery prices than any candidate in presidential history.
That's fascinating. Yeah, when you look, not even talking politically here, but when you look at someone like President Trump, who has said that you have to have your ID to buy groceries, it's interesting to kind of compare that to,
I hadn't thought of that.
To Pete Buttigieg's experience. He probably could tell you the cost of a box of cereal. He knows how much things are. He knows how much things are in Middle America in a place like South Bend. He shops at Costco up there. I don't know how many presidential candidates can say that they shop at Costco ahead of the 2020 race.
Okay, so let's get to the question that people who are frustrated with this episode are wanting to know if they haven't turned it off already. And by the way, if you don't align with this, align with Mayor Pete politically, I'm not saying I do either. We're just trying to understand people. There's an outside chance. I'm going to try to get other candidates, not only in the Democratic Party, but a certain incumbent person in that position. I think I have an outside shot of getting on the show. I'm not promising you President Trump on the show. I just want different people's perspective. Adam, the operative question is this: does it matter my fetish with how much these folks can relate to you and me? Does that matter, or does it just matter to me?
I think it does, Pete. I mean, one of the first times you and I talked together ahead of the 2016 race was looking at Marco Rubio's finances. There were a series of stories about him buying
that boat,
using a book advance to buy a high-priced speedboat that he had always wanted, and also having a high-interest HELOC, second mortgage. But I think as a journalist, for me, looking at a candidate's finances is highly revealing into their priorities. I think we need to talk about it more. I think the same is true with President Trump. The New York Times has looked at the president's tax returns, has looked at how he built his wealth. I think looking at a candidate's personal finances is remarkably revealing, and I think that we are sort of on the edge here in 2019 on a series of stories that looks at how candidates manage their money. I think we're going to see stories like that on Kamala Harris, on Joe Biden. Joe Biden during his time in the Senate was famously one of the poorest members of Congress. Now that's changed recently after his vice presidency, but it's remarkable. It tells you a story about how they have lived their life and how they have confronted challenges that a lot of us confront on a daily basis when balancing our personal budgets.
They just get this image of Marco Rubio motorboating his way through Florida, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he obviously got his book advanced, bought a boat. I mean, terrible idea. Pete Buttigieg joked the other night, whether it's true or not, it feels true. His book advanced for the book I just read and that you've read. They're using it to pay his husband's student loans.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I was at his book launch event in South Bend on Sunday, and he had a small reception for family and friends beforehand. And he joked that, I hope you buy this book. This is how we're paying Chasten student loans. This is also how we're paying for our wedding that they've had more than a year ago in South Bend, a wedding that was attended by David Axelrod, former President Obama's sort of chief political advisor and message maker. So, his story is interesting. It's going to get a lot of play in 2020 because he's from the middle of the country, and the only other Midwestern candidate who is announced is Senator Amy Klobuchar, who can kind of make that heartland appeal. So I think it's really interesting to hear about how people who have been outside of the Senate earn money, make money, budget their money. And I'm interested to hear more about some of the other candidates who are facing similar challenges.
Like you, I am fascinated with the personal finances of our government leaders. My favorite politician ever, simply based on their personal finances, is Richard Lugar.
Interesting.
When he went to Congress, he made it a point to get rid of all individual holdings that he had. He didn't have to at the time, but he did it. And he didn't necessarily enrich himself in Congress, but he made a living being a senator. On the turn, Vice President Mike Pence's largest asset is his state pension from being a government official. And you think about a 30-year career, and your largest asset is an entitlement program, if you want to call a pension that at the state level, which sounds terrible and people get angry at. But that's bothersome to me. But then you look at Nancy Pelosi, who her and her husband have somewhere between $28 and $50 million of net worth. And it's like, Adam, what are we to do with all this information I just want someone to make decisions for our country that's reflective of the people living in it.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated by people like Senator Lugar, former Senator Lugar, and even former Governor Mitch Daniels. In Pete Buttigieg's office in South Bend, he has pictures lining the windowsills, and he has a picture with Senator Lugar. He has a picture with Mitch Daniels. There isn't a picture of him and Mike Pence, which is interesting to me. It says a lot.
It's not that interesting. It's pretty obvious.
But the fascinating thing about Mike Pence is he often calls himself as being one of the people from the Jose Bank wing of the West Wing. He kind of shops for cheaper suits at Jose Bank, but he really doesn't have a lot of personal wealth. Even though he spent 12 years in Congress making a considerable amount of money. He spent time making around $98,000 as the governor of Indiana. It's interesting. He has student loans on his personal financial disclosure for his daughters.
Yeah, over $100,000.
Yeah, it's interesting to see kind of the differences between candidates who are kind of publicly conservative and privately spendthrifts and vice versa.
All right, we got a few seconds left before we go to our final segment. When we come back, here's what we're going to talk about. In Mayor Pete's book, he often references Martin O'Malley, who was the governor of Maryland. I believe was also the mayor of Baltimore at one point in time, who famously has one of the most notorious personal finance disclosures of all time. That's a hell of a tease, I'm going to be honest. That was really good. Coming up after the break, I'm going to tell you what that is. I'm Pete the Planner, and this is my show. Back on the Pete the Planner show. You're expecting biggest waste of money of the week, which is traditionally what we do in the fourth segment, but we're blowing it out today. This is the first and hopefully a series of presidential candidates coming on the show and talking about their financial lives. I teased before the break. Oh, by the way, joining me in the studio to analyze this is journalist Adam Wren. I was written for Politico, Indianapolis Monthly, Importantville, which is his great newsletter. I encourage you to subscribe. I have a t-shirt. Adam, that was my disclosure. Adam, one of the most notorious personal finance disclosures of all time was Martin O'Malley's disclosure when he was running in the last presidential cycle, maybe 2 ago. I don't know. No one cares. He had $339,000 in Parent Plus loans on his 3 children. I believe it's 3. Now I'm just making things up. That's absurd. Because to me, what that means is, while you see the value in education, no one can afford $339,000 in Parent Plus loans. Like, no one can afford that. That is a bad financial decision. And I'm curious, like, do you think that matters when we see the Marco Rubios of the world, the Martin O'Malleys of the world, that just make bad personal finance decisions? It's like, why would I trust you with that when you don't do that with your money?
I think it's certainly revealing. And you look at someone like that who has Parent Plus loans and you ask, I'm a new father. I have a 2-month-old daughter. I've just opened up a 529 savings account for
at
her.
collegechoicedirect.com. Sorry.
And I think about it. What was Martin O'Malley doing for 20 years before his daughter started to go to college?
Now, it's funny because in the book, Pete really holds Martin O'Malley out as sort of this beacon for like a management consulting approach to government, who systematized several things the way Pete has tried to do in South Bend. And it's funny because the disconnect for me is my feeling about his personal finances.
I look at someone like Mike Pence, and I realize we all live textured financial lives, and we all start from different starting points in life. But you look at someone like Mike Pence, who talks about being a fiscal conservative, and you know that he has had decades of a government paycheck. And you know that teachers, for example, are willing to save money and pay for their students' college education. But you look at Mike Pence, who talks a lot about fiscal conservative in saving money, and you ask, he has 3 children and he's carrying loans for them. Was he thinking about saving personally for their futures at the same time that publicly he was espousing sort of a fiscally conservative approach? I think there are differences between your private life and your public life as a governing official, but it does reveal something about their decision-making calculus.
I think now would be a good time to point out that you used to be a speechwriter for the GOP. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's something that I disclosed, that I disclose in conversations. But as a, for a year after I graduated from undergrad, I worked in the Senate GOP here in Indiana, just as sort of a comm staffer. I worked as a speechwriter, and the truth of the matter was I was interested in getting some government experience before going to journalism school and learning how government worked and taking that experience into being a journalist. A number of respected journalists have worked in politics. Chuck Todd worked on the Hill. Tim Russert worked on the Hill before he was in journalism. John Heilman, former...
I love John Heilman.
Yeah, he worked on the Hill as well. I think it's a great way to learn about how politics works. And, the Republican side had more jobs than the Democratic side, so I did work for a year.
Job creators, those
that's right.
Government.
Yeah, so I worked for 33 different Republican senators, some of whom were, more liberal than others, some of whom were more conservative. But during the Daniels administration, I did that, and it was a fascinating education.
And I bring that up for one reason. Because A, you know your stuff, and B, you've seen it from both perspectives, because we are in a binary perspective. It's just you are one or you are the other, and you've seen it from both sides, and I think that colors our conversation here today. So I guess let's bust out our crystal ball. We never use it for investment and financial predictions, but let's use it for political predictions here. What happens to the Buttigieg campaign? He's certainly in the press right now. He made a great appearance on what people call the Pete the Planner show, which might be the low point. Let's see if his campaign falls.
He warmed up on Stephen Colbert.
I know.
He warmed up for this appearance.
Yeah. So what happens now? Like what happens? I follow this stuff, but what do you think?
Well, the first DNC debates are in June, and they're only taking 20 candidates. They're looking for people who have more than 1% polls in early states like Nevada, Iowa, and South Carolina. And he needs to have $65,000 individual donors, small dollar donors, people donating $5, $10, $20 to his campaign to meet a threshold. And so he really has sort of a challenge between now and June to make it onto that debate stage. By all accounts, during his DNC chair run in 2017, he turned a lot of heads, and by some accounts, maybe beat the current DNC chair, Tom Perez, in a debate setting. He's a formidable debater. He's a formidable speaker, as we just heard in the interview. Very few verbal pauses, thinks fast on his feet. I think if he can make that debate stage, he'll go deeper into the primary process than a lot of people imagine. He's getting a lot of institutional support from talking heads on cable news shows. It'll be interesting to see how deep he goes, but it really comes down to him, I think, for small dollar donors and how much he can increase his name ID. He's taking calls from people like you, and he's doing as many interviews as possible, I think, to really boost that name ID.
I read through the lines there, Adam. I read through the lines. Now, at the risk of angering those that don't appreciate nuance, I want to say this. I would not call myself a supporter of him as a candidate. I support him as a person. Here's the big point. We're about the same age, he and I. We have a general similar sensibility. Politically, we share some ideas, not all of them. His husband calls him Peter and everyone else calls him Pete. My wife calls me Peter and everyone else calls me Pete. I feel connected to him like I've never felt connected to a person who would represent us on such a big stage. And again, here's the nuance. That doesn't mean I support him. I've just never honestly felt connected to anyone who I'm going to pull a lever for. Conceivably, that's weird. I think that's why maybe people of a different generation, boomer voters, you get to vote for people who you understand their lives. I've never had that privilege, and it feels pretty good right now.
Yeah. I've gotten a little bit of pushback from people on Twitter asking if I work on his staff.
No, I saw that the other day.
But I am an Indiana-based reporter. Someone in my state is running for the president, and it is my duty, I'm duty-bound to sort of cover that person as closely as possible. And, I think the goal of journalism is to accurately reflect and render your subject. And sometimes you cover people who have shady pasts. Sometimes you cover people who are Rhodes Scholars who have served their country. And I think, that sort of colors the coverage. Now, granted, if he makes a poor decision at some point, I'm duty-bound to cover that in a fair way. But his story is fascinating to me, and I do think that there's a certain age of a voter here in Indiana, a certain sensibility. They lived in the donut counties or in Indianapolis or maybe even South Bend or Bloomington, who see in Pete something of themselves, sort of a scrappy Midwestern underdog who's sort of in the middle of this coastal contest. I mean, most other candidates in this race are from the coast, from California, maybe from Texas, but for the most part in the middle of this country, he's someone who I think resonates not only geographically, but generationally.
Yeah, no, that's how I feel. And, I guess, again, for those that choose not to listen to nuance, let me spell it out for you. I'm an independent. I don't affiliate with either party. I love Mitch Daniels. I love Richard Lugar. And Pete Buttigieg makes sense to me as a person. As a political figure, I don't know, man. It's just too early. And by the way, who cares what I think? Honestly, if you're listening to this show for my political opinion, find a better show. There's a lot better ones on that. So, Adam, thanks for sticking around. Thanks for helping us analyze this. Where's the best place for people to find you? Importantville?
Yeah, you can go to importantville.com. That's IMPORTANTVILLE.com. You can also go to @AdamWren on Twitter and find me and my work there.
Adam Wren, WREN, since we're spelling. This has been
the bird.
Yeah, well, sure. This has been the Pete the Planner Show. Thanks for listening. our political edition, our first one ever. I'm sending you good vibes because good vibes are all that's in my budget. I'm Pete the Planner, and this is my show.